First, I'm going to have our panelists briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it. Um, Leadership has to do with how we shape and create our future and the future of those we lead. And we have an excellent panel of leaders up here, and I'd like them to briefly introduce who you are and then say one interesting fact about who you are. What you do and who you are. Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. Great to see some of you from last year here again, and also looking forward to meeting some of the newer faces. Elizabeth Coach. I am Senior Manager at GTI Energy, where I'm leading all of our environmental justice, energy equity, and community benefits plans for not just our hydrogen programs, but all of our low carbon energy solutions. And so we work with a lot of industry, utilities, and others to ensure that moving forward, whatever projects are going to be deployed are going to have communities in mind first and foremost, their needs, their priorities, and so that's it's been a great place to be over the last year, and so that's a little bit about me and the work I do. Something interesting about me overall is that I have way too many degrees, and and they're very different from each other. And so I think that's what kind of brings my unique perspective to the world, everything from architecture to an executive MBA and environment behavior science. So
Thanks, Elizabeth. John?
Hi, everyone. John Law. I'm Assistant Commissioner of Urban Design with the Chicago Department of Planning and Development. There I lead many of our priority citywide initiatives focusing on neighborhood development and community wealth building, including the Come Home Initiative and the Red Line Extension. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years working in the private sector at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, doing large-scale development locally as well as internationally. Lived in China for 3 years. I guess carrying on the theme of degrees, during COVID, whenever I was out getting dogs and learning new hobbies, I quit my job and got a second master's degree in sustainability and environmental justice. So it's a personal passion topic for me. I also got the dog as well, but that was it. Nice to meet you all.
Norman?
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation. We appreciate it. Norman Ruano. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Illinois Works at DCEO, which is the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I oversee the new bureau in charge of implementing equity and inclusion programming and construction in the trades in the state of Illinois. It's definitely a pleasure to work with hundreds and thousands of people throughout the state working on these efforts to ensure that our demographics in the state have an equitable access to construction and the trades. I've been doing workforce development for about 25 years now, particularly focused on women-owned, training women-owned, minority-owned contractors, but also training community members from underrepresented populations interested in entering the construction industry. Something interesting about me, I used to be a sociology professor for 10 years at City Colleges of Chicago, and it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life.
All right,
Thanks,
that's
Odella.
awesome. Yep. My name is Odalo Ohiku. I'm originally from Chicago. The name is a Nigerian name. A little bit about me. I am a deputy city attorney with the Office of City Attorney in Milwaukee. Um, since we're talking about DEI, Milwaukee currently has its first African American city attorney. Uh, Prior to joining the city attorney's office, I'm an attorney. I was in private practice for about close to 20 years, but I felt that it was an exciting opportunity to go and work for a diverse city attorney. Um, and one thing that's interesting about me, I was a golf caddy. I caddied on the North Shore at Exmoor Country Club in Highland Park.
Shannon?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shannon Stokes. I am Deputy General Counsel and Ethics Officer of the Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services. I am the sole Labor and Employment Counsel and also co-chair of the DEI Internal Subcommittee. I oversee the the attorney sections of FOIA, child support, procurement, privacy, and the Bureau of Administrative Hearings. An interesting fact about me, going back to COVID, I got my daughter a COVID puppy because she's an only child and she's lonely. And I somehow became that puppy's like emotional support human. So it didn't quite work out for me.
Well, thanks, everyone. My name's Ron Deverman. I'm a vice president with STV, which is a North American planning, engineering, construction management, program management firm. We focus on transportation infrastructure of all types, but also buildings and facilities as one of our national practices. And that could be anywhere from a airport terminal to a university building to a new hospital, that type of thing. STV's national environmental planning leader. And one interesting thing about me, maybe I'll even say two interesting things. I actually come from generations of farmers, so I even farmed for a living, was putting myself through college. And so I have a very intense Midwest work ethic. But the interesting thing about, we were talking about degrees here, my bachelor's degree is in civil and environmental engineering from U of I, Urbana. My master's is in English from what is now U of I's Springfield campus down at the state capitol. And my master's thesis was a volume of poetry. And so creative writing's been an avocation of mine my entire career. So if you want to meet me in the foyer after our session, I might just read you a poem. Okay? Well, let's jump into it. Each panelist was kind enough to give me some real, so their key talking points, things that they really wanted to talk about in the context of equity and public infrastructure. And I'm going to start with Elizabeth. She, with regard to infrastructure investments, the company that she works in, she wants to talk about the tipping point, the challenges, and how to create lasting value. Elizabeth?
Thanks so much, Ron. First and foremost, we are really at this critical moment, right? It wasn't just a tap that was opened, but the floodgates for infrastructure investments have been open, where we are drowning in it, but we need to do it the right way. So we have this opportunity right now to really change the dialogue on how we're approaching any infrastructure deployment moving forward. And this is a really critical piece because we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We want it to be an equitable approach. We want it to be transformative. We want to flip that dialogue and we want to ensure an equitable approach. And that moment is now. This is how we start it, because that infrastructure doesn't get deployed overnight. It's going to take years for it to actually get there. And so we have this opportunity to really start building that trust with communities, building that equitable relationship with them, and taking it from a different angle, and not the traditional conventional approaches that we've used before. And part of it is that we don't want opposition. We all want the same thing. And the point of that shared, lasting, vision, what does that look like? How do we get there? We have a number of challenges to overcome. And so I'm happy to talk about that some more later too, but those challenges are ones that are embedded in our society. And so it's not going to take just one group, one person, one industry. It's going to take everybody working together and having a vision, having a plan, having ways to measure. And when we look at what the federal government has been putting out with the Justice 40 initiative, then we understand this is not something that they're taking lightly. It's not a checkbox. It's not like, oh, are you doing DEI? This goes way beyond that. They are expecting that you measure progress in every single aspect of that. And when we're looking at it from the energy space, there are 8 energy policy priorities that they've identified and for any infrastructure, energy infrastructure deployment. And so if you're going to be receiving any kind of federal funds, you have to address all of those 8 in some way, shape, or form across the life of the funding and then even beyond, to show that there is going to be this a viable, sustainable relationship with communities, that there's an economic impact that continues beyond the federal funding, and that is through those built relationships that you are starting to do now because you want that funding, you want that investment. And so measuring that progress is going to be critical to success. And so we know this is not a overnight challenge. This is a multi-year. We're talking probably over the next decade. We're going to have to build this whole new dialogue, flipping the conversation, engaging in a way that we haven't engaged before, more deeply, with meaning, with input from communities, and giving them a say as well in what their future is going to look like in this. So, and it does cut across, the Justice 40 piece cuts across everything from DEIA to not just engagement as well that I talked about, but jobs, really critical piece to it, that those jobs, the benefits are going to be flowing to those communities. So that challenge exists, and we have to figure out how to move forward and measure that progress and show that we're doing things differently, engaging with community, giving them democracy when it comes to any new investment in infrastructure. And then my last one, I mean, like lasting value, what does that look like? I mean, I think we all have that shared vision already. It's figuring out the short-term, mid-term points that we can get to in order to create that lasting long-term vision, because we all want the same thing. We just have to figure out how to get there together. So.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I'd like to open it up now to the other panelists. Any thoughts in reaction to what Elizabeth just shared?
Speaking from the state's perspective, it is true we're making these huge investments out there. In particular, at the state level, we watch the compliance of about $10-15 billion worth of projects on an annual basis. However, it's very important to emphasize that although the gates are opening and flooding, the whole equity and inclusion piece is not going at the same pace. In the state of Illinois, for instance, we have huge inequities when it comes to representation of demographics in construction. Just to give you an example, the numbers released by IDOL recently show that only 4% of all apprentices in the state of Illinois are women, when women represent almost 51% of the state's population. We also have only 7% of all apprentices being African American, when they represent 14-15% of the population. So yeah, we're getting a lot of construction projects, but we need to make this dynamic so that there is more inclusion, there is more equity, particularly when it comes to jobs and workforce development. These are well-paid jobs. This is tax money that is being invested in massive amounts, and we need to ensure that the populations here in the state of Illinois have equitable access, and that's what our focus is at the Office of Illinois Works at DCEO, with the commitment of state government, the governor's unwavering commitment to make this happen and make it happen very soon and quickly in the state. So we encourage everybody to join in this great effort.
Yeah, thanks, Norman. Shannon?
I just wanted to add, as a fellow state employee, I think what's very important is not only do we make the big push to make sure that we have more equitable access to contracts and programming, but that we build the infrastructure underneath, that we make sure that we're able to support, that we grow a significant number of minority and female and non-binary members to further that pipeline. Sometimes we think about where we are, and that's great, but I also want us to think a little bit further down the line and making sure that the local universities or trade schools, et cetera, have the resources that people of these marginalized groups can actually participate in, and then grow and flourish and make sure that they bring the next one down the line as well. So I love what they're doing at DCEO. We hear about it a lot at HFS, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Next, John, I know with your work at the city, you've been very interested in the city-owned vacant land, and that's usually within those disinvested communities and neighborhoods. And the importance of supporting lower income neighborhoods, especially in this energy transition that we're going through. And you also mentioned the red line extension. You want to elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah, a lot to unpack there. But I think first, just building on what Elizabeth mentioned, when we think about a lens of equity in public infrastructure, I think the first thing is just sort of broaden how we approach these projects and move beyond a project boundary, but really engage a wider community, understand what their needs are, and do really meaningful engagement way before we even scope out a project, to listen to the community before we start, to understand what their needs and desires are, and then carry that through beyond the project. The second thing I think is really this sort of cascading effect, and that's where the vacant lots comes in. When we invest in something like public transportation or a streetscape improvement, how can we leverage that large federal or state investment and get more benefits out of that actually benefit the community themselves, to generate some wealth, not just for the business owners on the corridor, but perhaps actually move that into the communities. Thinking about Chicago, Chicago has over 10,000 vacant lots. We've been trying to sell them as fast as we can. We can't move them fast enough. And there are developers out there that want to build affordable homes on these lots. So we are trying to sort of focus our investment and energy. When we focus on a commercial corridor, we then want to think about how to leverage that investment to also generate development opportunities on these vacant lots, but not just for large developers to come in and sort of land grab, really focusing on emerging developers that are coming from these neighborhoods, thinking about people that are maybe renting apartments today that want to move into home ownership models, thinking about the small scale developer that is looking to scale up and start to build 3 or 4 houses at a time with an affordable approach as sort of what we call a gentle density, 2 flats, 3 flats, 6 flats, that can then obviously leverage the investment of that initial infrastructure investment, but really benefit the community through wealth building. Then I guess the third point with that is just making sure that equitable infrastructure needs to be accessible to everybody. We think about the energy transition. We think about, it's easy to get excited about innovation and the notions of moving to all electric buildings and decarbonizing our building stock, but we need to think about the implications of that down the line. And we want to make sure that once people are shifting off of natural gas to electric models, that the people that have the fewest resources available aren't the ones left holding the bag and having to pay for all that natural gas infrastructure that remains from the utility company. So it's easy to get excited about things like that, but we have to sort of continue to keep the conversations going with communities to make sure that there's not unintentional implications down the line.
Yeah, thank you. Panelists, reactions to what John just shared?
I will say again, I think it's important, and the approach, I love the approach of including the community. One of the key things that we see is the inclusion of community members in the jobs that are being generated. Unfortunately, we see that a lot of people working on those projects are imported people from other places in the state, sometimes imported from other states, and we need jobs in the community. These jobs are being paid for with public funds, a lot of them, and we need to ensure that individuals in those communities take advantage of those job opportunities. From our perspective at the state level, we are now placing goals that 10% of the hours worked on those projects have to be done by apprentices, and we are expecting that those apprentices come from these communities. We are training pre-apprentices in those communities and then connecting those pre-apprentices to those contractors so that there are no excuses that local individuals from those communities are not there, are not prepared, are not interested. We want to ensure that there is a systematic way of those communities benefiting not only from the project, but also from the jobs that are being created that obviously pay good wages and have good benefits. So that's our perspective. We are also very interested and are ready to implement a new program to give those contractors incentives so that when they hire and retain those individuals, get incentives so that they can use in the form of bid credits so that they can use them to then bid projects in the future with state or other agencies that are doing public projects so that they can win more projects and then execute more projects in the community. But we need to make sure that those jobs really, those companies are targeting also community members, because otherwise, how do we share the wealth with those communities? How do we ensure that a lot of those benefits being generated by those projects are also, coming to those communities and community members that desperately need them? So that's our focus and that's our interest.
And I would just say you got to go to where the people are. So I'll give the office of the city attorney as an example. The office wasn't diverse. It wasn't reflective of Milwaukee at large. So if we're down, if we don't have any Latino attorneys, we got to go to Latino organizations and let them know that we are actively looking for Latino attorneys. Same thing with the Asian community. If we don't have Asian attorneys, you got to go to the Asian community or Asian organizations or affinity groups to let them know we're here, we want you, we want you to come join us. Same thing with the Black community, so on and so forth. You got to go to where the people are. If you're actively trying to become more diverse and equitable and inclusive, don't just talk about it, be about it. Go out to these organizations and find the people. And I think that's, you got to actually put in the work and not just say DEI, DEI, DEI. Put in the work.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I'd like Norman now to talk a little bit about Illinois' commitment to equity and inclusion in the construction industry. That's been a real focus of his. And talk maybe a little bit about the progress that has been made, but then what else, do we need to do? And I know you mentioned the apprentice programs a little bit. If you want to elaborate on that a little bit more, that'd be great, Norman.
Certainly. So the Pritzker administration is laser focused on ensuring equity and inclusion in construction in the state of Illinois, not only from a political perspective, but also from a very grounds focused perspective. There's a law that was passed in 2019, the Illinois Works Jobs Program Act, that focuses on bringing about equity and inclusion to construction in the state of Illinois. That law created a variety of programs focused on making sure that happens. One of the programs creates demand for jobs so that we can bring in more apprentices into construction. Another program, the pre-apprenticeship program, is a network of providers. Right now we have 30 providers throughout the state of Illinois. We provide healthy amounts of funding so that they can train, recruit, and bring into construction underrepresented populations, particularly women, people of color, and veterans. And then this other program that I mentioned, which is an incentive program to ensure that contractors obtain incentives as they engage in this equity and inclusion practice. What's very important about this system is that it's statewide. We have right now 30 providers throughout the state of Illinois. We expect to bring the network to about 50 providers that will be training thousands of people throughout the state of Illinois. And again, focus on underrepresented populations with an investment of about $25 to $30 million every year on bringing about that change. This is work that takes a lot of effort. It's work that will take a long time, but we are very certain that we will be able to achieve positive results for underrepresented populations. Just to give you one simple example in terms of progress, as I mentioned, women represent 5% of all Illinois apprentices. And the question has always been, and I get asked this question in all kinds of different forums where I go, and people say, well, is it because they're not interested? And what we find is that a lot of women simply do not know the opportunities that they have in the construction sector. In our pre-apprenticeship pool, almost 30% of our students are presently women. And it's because we go give them the information, we go to the schools, we do marketing, we target them, we give them information, we let them know about the career opportunities, we let them know about the benefits and how much it pays. And in our network, almost 30% of students are women. Look at the difference between 5% and 30%, huge difference, right? So, if we make, like you mentioned, if we go and do the work, if we make the investments, if we have dedicated individuals really trying to make this work, we will see results. And we're starting to see the results. There's a lot of work that has to be done in this sector, but we are starting to see the results. Our evaluations, our reporting are already showing results from these efforts, but we are here for the long run, and we are here dedicated and committed to ensure this happens.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. Panelists, you want to react? Any reactions to?
Sure, I have a thought there. I think this notion of apprenticeship and sort of diversifying and broadening the pool of employees from a community standpoint can't be understated. I think there's also a responsibility to think about mentorship and apprenticeship at a higher level. Thinking about, we all know there's the big mega contractor firms out there that are doing a majority of the work at infrastructure scale, right? I think there's a responsibility and obligation for some of those firms to start mentoring these smaller women and minority-owned businesses to then start to scale up. Why can't a Black-owned business be a prime on a large infrastructure project, right? I think so. It's not just about individual mentorship, but sort of firm mentorship too, and helping to enable and support minority and women-owned and some better-known firms to take on bigger roles on these large federal projects.
Very good.
To
Elizabeth?
just add to that, I think what everyone here is saying is it ties back to exactly what I mentioned earlier on is the Justice 40 pieces, because these are the things that they want to see the progress in, from 5% to 30%. What kind of programs and initiatives are you starting to help support those small business enterprises, minority business enterprises? How are you helping the local disadvantaged communities make sure that they're having an active role in these infrastructure investments? And so these are exactly the kinds of things that Justice 40 wants to see. They want to see that progress and where you still need to go on every aspect. So including the inclusion pieces, including the local jobs and training, how you're setting up the peer mentorship for companies as well and for each other. Like, how are you supporting those local entrepreneurs and ensuring their success? So these are I think they're all aligned with what the federal model is looking for as well. And from a regional perspective, everyone looks to that the regional the federal government for the Justice 40 when we think about the hydrogen deployment. So that we have to take into account as well.
And I would add, and I think that's a great point about contractors. There's a lot of transfer of knowledge and experience that can be done from larger, very experienced contractors to the smaller ones, minority-owned, women-owned, and there is already infrastructure for that. And contractors that are interested, larger ones, medium-sized ones that are interested in engaging in those efforts, we have organizations such as the Hispanic American Construction Industry Association in the city that does that type of work with African American, Hispanic businesses, women-owned businesses. We have the Federation of Women Contractors that is also doing that type of work. USMCA, which is a group that focuses on African American, also Hispanic contractors. There are avenues, there are systems, there are structures already in place for larger contractors interested in doing that type of stuff, because it will take that effort. It will take that type of dedication to have more equity and inclusion beyond the rhetoric, right? It takes coordinated, dedicated effort to make it work.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. Odalo, I know you gave me a couple real interesting points here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a catchphrase, and to make real progress, you must be intentional. I'd really like to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that and maybe give some examples.
Yeah, an example that's in front of the group right now is just we're up here talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. If this panel was, let's say, all Black people, or let's say all white males, it would kind of lose some of its effect because we're talking about diversity, but then you're not showing any diversity. So I'm glad that this panel is diverse. It has women, it has people of color on it, and that's what I mean about you got to be intentional about it, right? I was in private practice for approximately, as a lawyer, approximately 19 years or so. October 23rd, 2020, I went to join the office of the city attorney for Milwaukee. Why? Because first of all, if you're not familiar with Milwaukee, Milwaukee is, I believe, it's the most segregated city in the United States. It has a zip code 53206, the most incarcerated zip code in the United States. So the reason I say that is when and in 2020, Milwaukee elected its first Black city attorney, right? And the reason I went to join the city attorney is because it's, I'm not really like someone who just talks and talks and doesn't do anything or complains about things. And and wines, but doesn't really do anything myself. I left a well-doing private practice to go and help the city attorney's office. Why? Because it wasn't, in my opinion, as diverse as it could be in terms of looking at the population of Milwaukee. And I saw it as a unique opportunity to go and be supportive in that role to try to make a difference for the city. Right? You're talking about the office of the city attorney, but really it's the city. The office of the city attorney does the work of the citizens of Milwaukee. So I felt it was, very important to go over there and try to do something that's going to make a difference. So I think we need to take action when you can take action. I know that we all have our own families and commitments and all that, but when you find an opportunity to address some of these things that we're talking about, I think go ahead and grab the bull by the horn and do what you can. The impact that you can make, actually make it, instead of letting it pass by. Because one thing too, let's say I didn't go join the office of the city attorney. Who knows when that next opportunity would come? It might not come. Prior city attorney was there for close to 40 years, so that's quite a long length of time. So seize the opportunities, put action behind the words, and I think we can all make a big difference.
Yeah, thank you.
If I-
Elizabeth?
Yeah, if I can add to that, the fact that your point about intentionality is so critical. I joined GTI Energy just a little over a year ago, and since then I've launched a couple of programs. One is the Energy Transitions Opportunity Program, and that was specifically aimed to for high school students, that we're looking at high schools that have high underrepresented groups in them. And we launched it with one particular high school where we brought them in and started to our labs, because we have a whole lab facility out there, to start to get them introduced to what the energies of tomorrow are. So sustainable aviation fuels, what that means, what it looks like, so that they have, and it's a 3-part program. First, we had some virtual sessions with a smaller group. And what's nice is the group was only a third of the entire group that would be get exposure, because we can only host a small amount at this point. But we're going to be repeating this program, and so the students really got a sense of who are the companies, number one, that are interested in sustainable aviation fuels. What are the feedstocks? Like, these are like things that they don't necessarily think about, and what are the different types of jobs that you can even have in this. Coming to visit our labs, they can see all the different aspects of even just looking at R&D. And so that's one of the programs where we feel like we've really launched an impactful program, and we're going to also have a teach the teacher program that helps the engineering teachers in those schools be able to communicate and develop curriculum around this to help support more integration of new energy technologies and what that means for the future and jobs and careers. And another one is through the hydrogen fuel cell race car. That's a really great one. The Midwest Alliance for Clean Hydrogen hubs here in the Midwest are sponsoring a bunch of high school and middle school teams, and it's remote fuel cell race cars. So they have to actually build it themselves. They race them themselves. Teachers can't be there to help the students. So it's an amazing way to kind of introduce them to those new technologies. And our focus has been on high schools where we had either in disadvantaged communities or have high underrepresented groups in them. So I think intentionality is really important, because that's the only way we're going to change that dialogue.
Yeah, thanks for that. Now, Shannon, in your role as Deputy General Counsel and Ethics Officer, you've talked about the importance that everyone have the opportunity for a healthy lifestyle, and especially that our medical professionals need to realize the importance and the overall circumstances of marginalized communities. You work for the Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Okay. I do implicit bias training quite a bit, and in that I give an example of a time when I have an alarm for my staff, and it's off. Okay. In that I give this example that when I was in law school, my going into my second year, the 4th of July, I started having like heart problems and getting ready to go to the doctor. It wasn't, or to the hospital, it wasn't the automatic thing for my family, like, hey, let's just go to the ER. It was, we were at a barbecue, 4th of July. Let's stop home. Let's make ourselves more presentable. All of these things so that we can like demand a basic sense of humanity. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. I get there. The doctor doesn't cross the threshold, looks at the monitor's going crazy, turns to me and asks me how many abortions had I had and how, or when was my last crack cocaine use. So I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I just went home and curled my hair while my heart was going all over the place for nothing. I have on a law school t-shirt, but that's just kind of how he viewed me, because that's just what he thought of people that look like me, which is very, very unfortunate. So within in the medical community, when we're dealing with people, that can have a very lasting impact. Now, thankfully, it didn't. I just wrote him off as an idiot, found better health care, et cetera, and just went on and lived my life. Conversely, my best friend, my daughter's godmother, is a deputy director at the City of Chicago, general counsel of an agency. She was born to two teenagers when they were 16, so she was on Medicaid and she wasn't treated fairly growing up by her doctors. As a result, today at our ripe old age, I'm still pushing her to go to the doctor. Make sure you call for Michaela's this. Make sure you call for Mark's that. So it's very important that our medical communities understand and see people for who they are, people first, in need of humanity, but that we manage our biases. So it's in my opinion, managing our bias is like the baseline. Whether we're in healthcare, whether we're in infrastructure, et cetera, you have to understand to be able to see people as people and not categorically of what we see or what we expect, or media representation, et cetera. We have to see people as people and then understand the lifestyle that they live, the resources that they may or may not have access to in order to actually treat them. So like social determinants of health and all of that is super, super important. Access to safe transportation, access to healthy groceries, all of those things matter. But the people at the table, which are the people on this panel, we have to make sure when we're making these decisions and going into the communities. And this has been the best panel to me to participate in, because I get to see that people who are making these very big decisions understand that they have a very big impact on humanity at a very basic level, just for us to live, just for us to breathe, buy groceries, have green space, all of those things. But you have to have people that understand the bigger picture, that believe in shared decision making, and just go with the golden rule that they treat people like they want to be treated. So I'm just so excited to just be here for that very reason. You all have been amazing. And I'm super excited to share this panel with you.
Thank you, Shannon, for that. I see our time is actually up. I want to thank everyone for your attention, and please join me in acknowledging our wonderful panelists today.